Mary King's Close. Mary King's Close is known to most as being Scotland's most haunted street. It's a very dark and mysterious looking street. I'm not sure if we have any Harry Potter fans watching, but it reminds me of the dark part of Diagon Alley. Just really strong and creepy vibes. It leads off of Edinburgh's Royal Mile, which is the road coming from Edinburgh Castle. This close was apparently gated off in the past during an outbreak of the plague and was left like this for a long time. Only pretty recently has it been reopened, but ever since it has, the reports of hauntings have run rampant. The most commonly spotted spirit here is that of a young girl. Nobody knows her name or why she's there, but she'll often appear holding a little plush bunny rabbit and run through the close. She's said to be devilishly tricky as well and will often steal tiny things off of your person as you pass by without even realizing. Phones, wallets, rings, necklaces, tiny things of this nature are often reported being lost or stolen after walking through the close. Some people think that when this place got bricked up, she was actually forgotten about in here and then died. I'm not sure how someone could possibly have forgotten a little girl here as they were locking it up, but I suppose anything is possible. Either way, it is deeply haunted now, and if you do go, then make sure you leave all your valuables at home. Number 4 on this list is Stirling Castle. Stirling Castle is one of the most haunted castles in all of Scotland's history and is located on top of Castle Hill. Great Castles writes, "The most famous spirit to call Stirling Castle home is the ghost of the Green Lady. Stirling Castle still serves as the home to a garrison, and one evening she delayed dinner in the officers' mess when she materialized behind the chef who was preparing the meal for the soldiers. Feeling as though he was being watched, he turned around only to see her green, translucent form standing behind him, at which time he fainted. She simply vanished on this occasion, but her appearances are usually a harbinger of bad things to come. On several occasions, her visits have occurred shortly before fires or other mishaps at the castle. The ghost of a pink lady sometimes can be seen leaving the castle and walking to the neighboring church of the Holy Rood Ladies' Rock. This was an elevated location where the ladies of the court would go to watch knights participate in jousting tournaments. Some believe the Pink Lady is the ghost of the sole survivor of Edward I's siege of the castle in 1304. Having escaped the siege, she keeps returning to the castle to find her slain husband, though her spirit is seen leaving the castle, not entering. This article then goes on to talk about a ghost of a man with a kilt who lives around the dungeons of this castle and occasionally shows himself to the visitors. But clearly the spirits of this castle are pretty fond of bright colors. The Green Lady, the Pink Lady, I'm kind of surprised that we didn't get a few more ghosts together and we can make a whole freaking rainbow. Even though they are bright and colorful, they are still very scary. In fact, there have been reports of people actually dying of sheer fright before, their corpses looking as if they were petrified to death. It's also believed that if you don't die of fright, then seeing these ghosts is a sign of horrible things to come. Either way, I would recommend avoiding this spot altogether. Scotland has a bunch of other non-haunted castles to visit if you need to get your castle fix in. Number 3 on this list is the Culloden Moor. The Culloden Moor acted as the site for one of Scotland's most infamous and bloody battles in all of history. Christy McIntyre writes, "Many of the ancient battlefields of Scotland are rumored to be plagued by the souls of those who died there. It's not surprising that Culloden, the site one of the most infamous battles in British history, is among them. Over in under an hour, nearly 1,500 Jacobite soldiers were killed, and it remains the last battle fought on British soil. But according to some locals, the battle still rages. Gunfire, swords, and crying are set to echo across the empty moor, particularly on the anniversary of the battle. As well as sounds of combat, the figure of a lone Jacobite soldier reportedly roams the battlefield, wandering in his clan tartan, muttering 'defeated' over and over again as he goes. He's not the only ghostly visitor to this site. Close to the battlefield is the house that Bonnie Prince Charlie, leader of the Jacobite rebellion, slept in the night before the battle. Although now a hotel, it's said that the prince still lingers there wearing full Highland dress, waiting for the battle that will restore him to the throne. Birds are said to never sing or even fly over this area since they can sense the horrible spirits that are still around here. Whenever birds or animals in general want to avoid a certain area, usually it makes me pretty skeptical as well. Animals have a sixth sense about such things and they can feel danger before it's even there. Also, if I'm to avoid any ghosts, then it's always going to be the ones that were slain in battle. These souls have been through hell and are obviously very dangerous. Our soldier could wander around saying defeated, or he could pull out his ghost sword and go to town on you. Not a risk that I am personally willing to take. Number 2 on this list is Overton Bridge. I'm sorry, but this bridge is clearly haunted. Is actually the title of an article written by Amanda Arnold on how freaking haunted this bridge actually is. The bridge is located in the small Scottish town of Dumbarton. Most bridges that we talk about on this channel are haunted by the ghosts of those who have passed away here, or some lady in white that longs for her lover here, or something like that. Not this one though. This bridge actually isn't dangerous at all to humans. It is, however, super dangerous to our best friends. Dogs. Apparently this one little bridge in basically the middle of nowhere has been the host to over 50 dogs taking their own life. Yeah, you heard that properly, a dog taking their own life. In the past 60 years, anywhere from 300 to 600 dogs have thrown themselves over the bridge for no apparent reason, and over 50 of them have died from the fall. Think about that statistic for a second. Like, that's actually kind of crazy. Outsiders believe that there has to be some kind of smell or some property around here that attracts the dogs to the water, but locals believe it's something paranormal. Apparently, even though these spirits are not dangerous to humans, we can still sense them, and people around here have sensed these beings before. It also doesn't seem like a smell that bothers these dogs because they go into a deep trance right before they leap off. At first, she froze, McKinnon told the Times, but then she became possessed by a strange energy and ran and jumped right off the parapet. That was a statement from a dog owner who watched as their dog jumped off the bridge. Locals think that the ghost who is causing these doggy disturbances are from the Lady of Overton. She died here many years ago mourning her husband. I suppose this could be the case, but why is she taking out her grief on dogs? Like, come on lady, let's leave the pups out of this. Anyways, this is definitely a haunted spot, and if you do happen to be walking your dog here, then keep it on a leash. Number 1 on this list is Cawdor Castle. Cawdor Castle is definitely one of the most haunted castles in Europe. It is quite a name for itself because it has a strong connection to one of the most successful stories ever written, Macbeth. This also adds to the lore of this castle's haunting because Macbeth, or the Scottish play, has its own history of haunting surrounding it. Even though this castle is deeply tied in with that story, its haunting doesn't share any connection to the one that plagues Macbeth. This one is centered around the ghost of a woman named Muriel Cawdor. Muriel Cawdor was the daughter of the Earl of Cawdor, who was in charge of the castle in the 18th century. Her ghost is seen at this castle all the time, with most of the sightings taking place in the tallest tower here. There are 2 stories of origin for how she managed to come about, and no one is 100% sure which is the correct one. The first story talks about how she fell in love with someone from a rival clan. A real Romeo and Juliet story where she was deeply in love with someone that she wasn't allowed to see. She would sneak out to see this boy, but eventually her father caught her and punished her for her actions. After learning of her treachery, his rage knew no bounds and he beat his daughter. She got away though and ran to the top of the tower, locking the door behind her. Her father wasn't deterred though and broke through, drawing his sword in the process. She tried climbing out the window to safety, but her dad, with one big swing, cut both of her hands off and she fell to her death. The second story doesn't include the dramatic chase up to the tower, but says that he just cut her hands off as punishment so that she could never hold her lover again. Obviously though, with both of her hands sliced off, she couldn't really do much of anything and died from blood loss soon after. Either way, her ghost is now forever restless in this castle and makes itself regularly known to visitors. Obviously, the key identifier of this apparition is her lack of 2 hands.
The Tower of London is most famous for housing the crown jewels. It was also known throughout history for housing some famous prisoners in their final days before execution. It has been the centre of many historical events, so it's no surprise that it's haunted by the ghosts of the past. One of the most famous ghosts that haunts the tower is Guy Fawkes. As the rhyme goes, remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Every November November 5th, British people hold a bonfire to remember the gunpowder treason. In 1605, Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament. He was hoping to kill the king. His plan was foiled when one of his conspirators told the police of the plan that night before the explosion was going to take place. Guy Fawkes was taken to the Tower of London while awaiting his trial. He was sentenced to be publicly executed and brought out to the square of the Tower. He spent his last days in captivity in the Tower as well as passing away there. Since then, there have been sightings or whispers of Fawkes from those visiting the Towers, especially around the 5th of November when his spirit is the most restless. He is not the only famous ghost who is stuck around the Tower. There have been many sightings of Anne Boleyn. She is often seen walking around various rooms after closing by security. Others have seen her staring through the window of the room which she was once imprisoned. A couple of guests have entered that room and heard a distant sound of a woman crying for help. It is believed her spirit is stuck here since her life was ended so tragically. Coming in at number 4, we have Pendle Hill. Pendle Hill might seem like a nice place for a hike in Lancashire, but there is much more than that to it. Since 1612, the land has been haunted due to the actions of the townspeople. The Pendle witch trials are among the most famous of the witch trials in English history. There were 11 on trial for the use of witchcraft. They were accused for being responsible for the deaths of 10 people who had recently passed. Only one of the accused was found not guilty, the other 10 were to be executed for their use of witchcraft. Once they were found guilty, they were each hanged for their crimes and buried under the hill. There was one witch in particular who was feared. She was referred to as Alice Nutter. She was wealthier than the other witches and was seen to have the most power. She shocked the town with her complete silence during her trial. These 10 witches now haunt the area. The people of East Lancashire remain cautious of the witches of Pendle Hill. It has been investigated by many ghost hunting teams. Once claimed that there are more than just the spirits of the witches in the area. They claimed there are also children and airmen who were bombed during the war. The area seems to attract tragedy and many have passed there. Locals refuse to go anywhere near the hill after dark as there have been so many sightings of the ghosts. Some have even seen the witches on the hill after dark. One local said they saw what looked like 10 women performing some kind of ritual. Could this be a tribute or the spirits of the witches attempting to communicate with the living? In at number 3, we have Theatre Royal. The Theatre Royal sits in London on Drury Lane. During the late 17th century, the theatre was one of the leading theatres in all of London. There were many famous actors who performed at the West End location on a regular basis. The theatre grew in popularity after the Second World War when they pioneered musicals such as Oklahoma, My Fair Lady and Miss Saigon. It is now owned by the famous composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. Although it's no longer the most prestigious theatre in London, it is one of the first and the longest open. Today it is open with the production of Frozen. What a classic. But it is still one of the most haunted locations in London. There have been many people who have passed through the hall since it opened in the 1700s. There are many stories of tragedies that happened here and spirits that could never leave. Although there have been ghostly sightings, the performers see it as an omen of good luck for an upcoming performance. So they're not so much feared but more so welcomed before a show. The most famous ghost is the Man in Grey. He is a tall man dressed from the 18th century with a top hat and powdered wig holding a prop sword as though he was about to step on stage to perform. There is a story told about why he haunts the theatre. Apparently the Man in Grey was preparing for his performance when he was stabbed. By who? We will never know. He then walked up into a side passage next to the royal viewing box. He was walled in so thick that no one heard him scream. It is unclear why anyone wanted to do this to the man. His remains were found over 100 years later and there was finally an explanation for all of the sightings. So if you happen to see him during your visit, try not to get too scared. It means the show will go well. Go see Frozen, it's gonna be a bop. Coming in at number 2, we have Hampton Court Palace. The palace was built in 1514 for Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, the chief minister of King Henry VIII. When the chief fell out of grace with the king, he gave him the palace in an attempt to save face for his family. It soon became the king's favoured residence. He then commissioned to have the palace expanded. It is one of the only surviving palaces out of the many the king owned. The house is currently owned by Queen Elizabeth II and the Crown. Today the palace is open to the public and a major tourist attraction. The palace is well known for its ghosts. This was a key selling point when open to the public. They knew that the ghosts who lived within the walls would give the guests a visit to remember. One of the most seen spirits spirits is that of Jane Seymour, who died in 1537. She was the king's third and most beloved wife. She had given the king the son he had longed for. After Prince Edward was born, Jane passed due to complications with the birth. While delighted to have his son, the king was devastated at the sudden loss of his perfect queen. A pale figure in a long white dress is reported to appear on the Silver Stick stairs, which once led up to the room in which Jane gave birth and then passed away. Jane is not only one of King Henry's wives that haunts the halls. Henry's fifth queen, Catherine Howard, had also been seen around the halls. Catherine was known for her wild ways. Her ghost is also known to be more vocal and sighted more often than that of Jane. Catherine was beheaded at the Tower in 1542. She was only 19 when she passed. She had been accused of adultery and treason. It is claimed that while she was being transported to the gallows, she broke free. She ran screaming through the halls, begging the king to have mercy on her. She never reached Henry and she would never see him again. It is said she now spends eternity screaming in anguish through those same halls. Coming in at number 1, we have Stonehenge. No one knows where Stonehenge came from. It has always been surrounded in mystery. Some archaeologists think it was created in 3000 BC to 2000 BC, but it's unclear how they would have the machinery to carve the stones or lift them into place. It is one of the most famous landmarks in the United Kingdom and is now protected to preserve it. It might be strange to believe now, but back in 1915 Stonehenge was up for public auction. Cecil Chubb had no intention to buy the landmark when he went to the auction that day. But when the bids were slow, he managed to win the land for $6,600. Although he had not planned on owning the land or the landmark, once he did, he wanted to restore it. It had fallen into neglect with its past owner and needed some maintenance. He decided that he would fence off the monument and begin charging 1 shilling for admission to pay for a guard and the restorations needed to restore it. There were a group of Celtic pagans named the Druids. They claimed that their people built the structure and used it as a place of worship. The group hoped to continue to hold their annual summer solstice ceremony there as they believed their ancestors did. The previous owner of Stonehenge had banned them for using it as it was on his land. This led the Druids to curse him. They said for as long as they're denied access to their sacred land, then the curse will follow the owner. Just 1 year after the curse, the owner lost his only son and heir to his fortune and land. 4 months later, he would pass away himself, leaving everything to his widow, who put the estate up for auction. Chubb was aware of the curse and did not want some fate to take his own family. He decided to gift Stonehenge to the British government, with one condition: that those who lived near the monument visit it for free as he did as a child. It is said the curse still remains, along with the ghosts of the ancestors of the Druids who were buried there long ago. They watch over the land to make sure their descendants are still connected and no one is mistreating the sacred monument. To this day, the British government does allow the Druids to perform their ceremonies each year, until 2019 when the lockdowns forced them to cancel any and all in-person celebrations at Stonehenge. The senior Druid spoke out against this warning, saying that this move would not end well for anyone connected to the land.
Also known as Pendle Hill is located in the Lancashire countryside near the villages of Burnley, Colne, Padiham, Clitheroe, and Nelson. Pendle Hill is famous for George Fox's visitation, the Quaker movement leader in 1652, and the barometer experiments of Richard Towneley in 1661. I feel like I'm missing something else they were famous for. Let's see if I can get the grey matter in here working. Oh, right. It's home to a very famous witch trial. Locals to the area know very well the story of the 10 women executed for witchcraft at Pendle Hill in the 17th century, who, still haunt the area. The story of the Pendle Witches is an excellent example of a well-documented allegation of witchcraft. So this tale begins way back in the year 1612, when there was said to be a family of local peasants who lived in a vast limestone tower. However, the family was no ordinary family. These peasants had enormous powers and were reported to be in league with the devil. According to reports, the family made clay effigies out of teeth and human hair. In a coincidence that's going to surprise absolutely no one, local people died of various mysterious illnesses or great pains at the time. The milk in the area turned sour and cattle died mysteriously as well. People were kind of afraid to go up that hill. A local magistrate, Roger Norwell, made the decision to arrest 2 people living in the tower. They were brought to Lancaster for trial, and 2 days later, the rest of the witches were arrested and also taken to Lancaster for trial. Out of the 12 folks on trial, 1 passed during the proceedings, another one was found not guilty, and the other 10 were, very much found guilty. On August 20th of 1612, all 10 accused witches went to the way of the rope necklace at Gallows Hill. The history of the witch trials has given the place an eerie atmosphere and several terrifying reports. Pendle Hill was featured on the show Most Haunted, during which several supernatural events are said to have taken place, including members of the show's crew being injured. Most of the ghostly activity is said to be out of spite from the witches, who continue to call Pendle Hill their cursed home. One tale of haunting in particular took place during a Ouija board experiment. Is my disdain showing yet? The stupidity was happening in the foundations of Malkin Tower, when a tooth suddenly landed on the center of the table. Now this caused everyone present to be extremely concerned, and after having obviously checked to ensure that nobody in the group had lost a tooth, which was, definitely human, it left the folks involved in a quandary as to how it got there. The tooth was eventually identified as belonging to an adult of around 40 years of age, and was in fact an old tooth. And if a league of ticked off witches wasn't enough ghosties for y'all, a Bronze Age burial site has been discovered at the hill's summit. Just a little bonus. In fourth place, we have Stirling, Scotland. This beautiful market town has played a pivotal role in the history of Scotland, along with playing host to multiple grisly stories and, unsettled spirits. The imposing hilltop, Stirling Castle, is home to several ghosts, and I'm struggling to decide who to talk about in detail. Probably one of the mysterious ladies. Oh, I know, the Green Lady. It is believed that she was a servant girl in the employ of Mary, Queen of Scots, and a very gifted one at that, who was blessed with the powers of foretelling, or second sight. So this maiden had a premonition that if her queen slept even one night within the ancient fortress, she would not live to see dawn. So she told her mistress of the fears, and thankfully, Mary listened and offered to allow the girl to watch over her as she slept, and, call for aid should any threat present itself. Through the long, dark night, our serving gal sat, bundled in a great soft chair guarding her beloved queen. Weary from a long journey, Mary fell into a deep slumber as soon as her head hit the pillow. And this girl too was kind of weary. She barred the door and, lighting a taper, sat by the bedside. There she sat for what seemed like an eternity, near hypnotized by the flickering of the taper's end. But try as she might, she could not resist the weariness in her bones. Her limbs grew heavy, her eyelids heavier still, and decided, that maybe closing her eyes for a minute wouldn't hurt since she was so exhausted. Hey, we've all been there. In what seemed like no more than a few moments, she opened them again, blinking against the sudden brightness of the chamber. She, through bleary eyes, tried to call out, but found her throat so dry and realized that the tiny taper, set so carefully by the queen's cot, had fallen, lighting the bedclothes and tapestries on fire. Coughing, she darted from her chair, gathering the deeply sleeping queen in her arms, and carried her towards the door, barely managing to get her to safety before eventually passing from smoke inhalation. Sadly, her name has been forgotten. She is known only by the color of the gown she wore, the Green Lady. So visitors to Stirling should be mindful that their female phantoms have one thing in common. Yeah, I said phantoms, plural. It is said that whosoever looks even once into their eyes won't make it through the night. So if you notice like a ruffled robe or well-turned spectral heel as you're passing around, turn away, avert your gaze, because you don't want to risk your soul. Some say that Queen Mary herself haunts the castle, roaming the grounds in a pink dress. The Darnley Coffee House on Bow Street is also said to be haunted by a mischievous poltergeist, while the Old Town Jail is home to the spirit of the last man that went the way of the rope necklace on site. In third place, we have Edinburgh, Scotland. So the beautiful city of Edinburgh is well known for its ghostly activity. For starters, the South Bridge vaults are haunted by several different ghosts. During the Irish potato famine of 1845 to 47, thousands of Irish folks immigrated to Scotland seeking, survival. Forced into the vaults under the bridge, as many as 10 people lived in a single room. The conditions were poorer than the tenants, crowded and damp with barely any air circulation. And just like that, the area quickly became Edinburgh's red light district. Services of the night, please tell me you get what I'm referencing, gambling, and a thriving black market were commonplace in the vaults. By the late 19th century, the vaults were closed off for good in an effort to drive the seedy activity out from under Edinburgh's main thoroughfare. For decades, these vaults sat empty as their icky past slipped into obscurity. Obscurity that ended in 1998 when a local man crawled through a narrow passageway in one of his buildings and rediscovered the rooms underneath the bridge. Since then, the cavernous vaults of Southbridge have been open to the public, and the reports of ghosts have poured in. Honestly, what have I said about leaving hidden spaces that are blocked off be? Nothing good comes from opening them. Witnesses have claimed to feel cold gusts of air, hear voices, and to see and sense an intangible presence. Some ghosts are quite bold, like the spectral youngling Jack, who likes to grab visitors' hands in the wine vaults, just for funsies. While another more menacing presence is known as Mr. Boots. He's an unkept man that was named for his, tall footwear. He lurks in the back section of the vault and has been known to push and throw rocks at visitors. Some have claimed to hear his footsteps on the cobbles and his echoing voice cursing throughout the chambers. It's even rumored that in the 1820s, the infamous serial killers William Burke and William Hare lurked within the vaults, killing some of their 17 victims there, and storing the bodies in that same location until they were sold off for medical dissections. Visitors to Edinburgh Castle also frequently report sightings of apparitions. A young piper who disappeared without a trace hundreds of years ago can still be heard today, with the faint, haunting sound of a lost soul. As well as the story of the vanished piper, the dungeons are frequented by a headless drummer boy and a gaggle of French prisoners captured during the 7-Year War, who are regularly sighted in and around the castle. If you hear the bark of a dog in Edinburgh's Old Town, yet there's nothing there, it could be Bobby, a phantom Skye Terrier that is known to all in the city. The faithful hound spent 14 years guarding his master's grave until he finally passed away in 1872 and was buried in Greyfriars Kirkland, near his owner. People still hear his little bark near his grave. A small statue of Greyfriars Bobby is a popular landmark on the corner of Candlemaker Row, and it's good luck to rub Bobby's nose. Aw, here I am tempted to plan a trip, mainly to give a good ghost doggy a pet. Oh, almost forgot. Greyfriars is a graveyard that dates back to the 16th century and is the resting place of several infamous characters, but the most gruesome story is that of Bloody Mackenzie. Look, the interwebs really don't like when I say that word, so bear with me here. This wealthy lord was tasked with punishing hundreds of prisoners who refused to change their religion. Locals believe that the ghost of Mackenzie haunts the graveyard after his tomb was disturbed by a homeless man who broke into the graveyard at night. As soon as he laid hands on the tomb, the floor opened up beneath him and he dropped into a shallow grave containing plague victims. Since then, many other freaky episodes have taken place nearby. A woman was found unconscious with bruises around her neck, and many claim that it was Mackenzie's poltergeist, continuing his evil deeds in death as he did in life. No biggie. In second place, we have Canterbury, Kent. While this medieval city might be aesthetically stunning, it has quite the dark past. The ghosties here tend to be a little more spread out than other places, and have different tales, so let's have fun with some short and sweet descriptions. For starters, Canterbury Cathedral, a pilgrimage site for centuries, is the home to many restless spirits. Archbishop of Canterbury was famously and brutally killed by the King's Knights in 1170. Beckett's place of death has a large welded cross above it with 2 swords. His tomb can be found near the high altar, where his apparition still appears to visitors. Other cathedral ghosts include a nun and the ghost of Simon of Sudbury, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury from around 1375. Other paranormal hotspots in Canterbury include Tiny Tim's Tea Room, haunted by the spirits of 3 younglings whose remains were found within the walls during restoration. And hey, if you hang around Hawks Road, you might glimpse Abigail, a sad soul who frequents the area. Another spooky house in the area is the Bishop's Finger, which is located on St. Dunstan Street. In the 19th century, a housekeeper by the name of Ellen Blean discovered that her employer, a priest, was having an affair with a younger woman. It is said that Ellen poisoned the pair with a meat pie and then vanished from the city. Shortly afterwards, it was discovered that she had been buried alive as her body was found nearby. Ellen is said to wander the streets and manifest herself in the Bishop's Finger every Friday. She's described as, plain-faced, larger lady in a long white skirt and a mob cap. There are more haunted places in Canterbury, but sadly I don't have all the time I would like to go into more detail. In first place, we have the village of Pluckley. Included in the Guinness Book of Records as the most haunted place in Britain, the Kentish village of Pluckley's popularity amongst ghosts and ghouls had to make it the #1 spot on our list today. Wandering monks, decapitated highwaymen, and all manner of central casting spirits reside here, but special attention should be paid to the particularly gruesome story of the Pluckley watercress lady. Seen smoking a clay pipe and living on the banks of the river about a century ago, the woman would sell watercress to the locals and drink gin from a flask. My kind of lady. Falling asleep one evening, it is believed that her pipe scattered ashes onto her rags and she burnt to death. So nowadays, a pink glowing specter can allegedly be spotted at the exact location where she went up in flames. Now, before someone asks why this place is scarier than the others on today's list, other ghosties who frequent in the town include the specter of the highwaymen who hide in a tree at Pinnock, a phantom coach and horses who pop up in several areas around the village, the ghost of a Romani woman who drowned in a stream, a miller who has been seen at Mill Hill, the hanging body of a schoolmaster in Dickie Bus's Lane, a colonel who hanged himself in Park Wood, a man smothered by a wall of clay who drowned at the brickworks, the Lady of Rose Court, who is said to have poisoned herself in despair over a love triangle, the White Lady, a young woman who is apparently buried inside 7 coffins and an oak sarcophagus, who haunts St. Nicholas's Church, but not to be confused with the Red Lady, reputably a member of the family who haunts the churchyard of St. Nicholas's Church. Oh, and a small white dog has also been reported in the same location. Now, I don't know about y'all watching, but that's a few more ghosties than I'd like to see in a smaller town. And the fact that they like to roam and not stay in one spot? Hard pass.
Lancaster Castle. This medieval castle is located in Lancaster in the county of Lancashire, a place that will be making an appearance later on down our list. It is rumoured to have been founded back in the 11th century on the site of the Roman fort overlooking a crossing of the River Lune. It eventually came under royal control in 1164, and in 1322 and 1389, when the Scots Scots invaded England, they progressed as far as Lancaster Castle, ultimately damaging it, with the castle seeing no further military action until the English Civil War. However, what makes this castle so infamous is its ties to witches. During the period 1584 to 1646, 15 Catholics were executed in Lancaster for their faith, with the notorious Pendle Witches trial taking place in the castle in 1612. The trials of the Pendle Witches are among the most famous witch trials in all of history. 12 people were accused of the murders of 10 people by the use of witchcraft, and were executed by hanging at the Lancaster Castle, hence why this castle is known as one of the most haunted places in the entire UK. Coming in at 4, Woodchester Mansion. Located in Woodchester Park in Gloucestershire, England, this Gothic revival mansion was left abandoned and unfinished back in the mid-1870s. The mansion's creator William Lee purchased the property for £100,000 in 1854, demolishing an existing house on the site called Spring Park, which had been home to the Ducey family and housed visitors such as George III. However, despite not having inhabitants, Woodchester is known for its abundance of paranormal activity. One incident occurred on the evening of October 7, 2005, when researchers attended the mansion for an overnight investigation in conjunction with Gloucestershire Paranormal Group. The first unexplainable event the group experienced was a perfect sphere of light the size of a 10-pence coin, which they say rapidly travelled the corridor before disappearing. The incident left some of the group utterly dazed, with some experiencing a strong feeling of deja vu. The second occurrence found the corridor dimly illuminated for 3 seconds by a strange blue glow that descended from the rafters. The group managed to capture these strange sightings on video, and no one has yet to be able to explain it as anything other than a ghostly haunting. Coming in at 3, Bury Pomeroy Castle, Devon. Built in the late 15th century by the Pomeroy family, this Tudor mansion is near the village of Bury Pomeroy in South Devon, England, aka where my family lives. Shout out fam. Now this castle has an interesting story because by 1547 the family were facing financial difficulties and sold the lands to Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who was ultimately executed, but the land still remained with his family, up until it was abandoned in the late 17th century when the 4th Baronet moved to Wiltshire. The castle sat in ruins for 100 years until it became celebrated as an example of picturesque, and in turn a popular tourist attraction which still remains to this day. However, what makes it more famous throughout the UK is its reputation for being haunted. Between the years of 1980 to 1996, the castle was subjected to extensive excavations that clarified much of its history and aided in more and more legends surrounding the property and its former owners. 2 female ghosts are said to haunt the castle, the White Lady and the Blue Lady. The Blue Lady is said to beckon for help from passers-by, luring them to the tower which, if they follow, will lead to their death. She is also said to wander the dungeons, mourning the loss of her baby, which she murdered as it was sired by her own father. The White Lady, on the other hand, is said to be the spirit of Margaret Pomeroy, and is claimed to also haunt the dungeons, having been imprisoned there by her sister who was jealous of her beauty. Would you dare spend a night in the Pomeroy Castle dungeon? I wouldn't. Coming in at 2, the Langham Hotel. Located in the heart of London, the Langham Hotel was built all the way back in 1865, and due to various frightening events, it quickly became dubbed the most haunted hotel in England, with room 333 inhibiting the most ghosts. During the Great Depression, the hotel was hit hard, with the owners attempting to sell the site to the BBC, but to no avail. During World War II, the hotel was used in part by the army, until it was ultimately damaged by bombs and forced to close. Now, some of the ghosts that reside in the hotel include a doctor who murdered his wife and then killed himself while on their honeymoon, a German prince who jumped out of a 4th floor window, a man with a gaping wound on his face, Emperor Napoleon III, a ghost who has a thing for tipping guests out of bed while they're sleeping, a butler seen wandering the corridors in his holy socks, and a footman in pale blue livery and powdered wig. Yeah, there are a lot of spirits that supposedly reside in the Langham Hotel, with most of the aforementioned ghosts being spotted in room 333. Would you stay the night in that room? And finally, coming in at number 1, Borley Rectory. Aptly known as the most haunted house in England, Borley Rectory was a Victorian home built back in 1862 to house the rector of the parish of Borley and his family. However, in 1939 it was badly damaged in a fire before ultimately being demolished in 1944. Now, prior to that, it was alleged to be haunted from the day it was built, with reports spiking in 1929 resulting in paranormal researcher Harry Price writing 2 books supporting the claims of paranormal activity. The first paranormal paranormal event occurred in 1863, when a few locals reported hearing unexplained footsteps within the home, and on the 28th of July 1900, 4 daughters of the rector, Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, saw what they believed to be the ghost of a nun outside of the home, which, interesting fact, is what inspired the movie The Nun. They attempted to talk to it, but it disappeared as they got closer. Now, many locals insisted the ghost was that of a young woman who had tried to elope with a monk during the 13th century, but was ultimately caught. The monk in turn was executed by hanging, and the girl was reportedly caved in between the brick walls of the home where she died. If this legend doesn't scare you enough, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren took one of the bricks of the rectory where it's housed in their museum in Connecticut. Known as the Big Grey Man of Ben MacDhui in Scottish folklore, this creature is said to haunt the summit of Ben MacDhui. Although there have been many sightings of the Big Grey Man, few have actually seen the creature with their eyes. Rather bizarrely, a couple of witnesses claim the creature wears a top hat, and whenever he appears, the sound of loud crunching footsteps echo across the mountains. Some hear singing, others ghostly laughter. Although there have been many sightings of the Big Grey Man, few have actually seen the creature with their eyes. This is due to the fact that the Grey Man is apparently more often felt than physically seen. Climbers experience uncontrolled terror, deep despair, and huge negative energy. Not surprisingly, many walkers feel an overwhelming desire to run away. Some have felt themselves pursued by echoing footsteps. Others are hypnotically drawn to the edge of cliffs. Those people who actually have witnessed the creature describe it to be very thin and over 10 feet tall, with dark skin, hair, long arms, and broad shoulders. That being said, most often the creature remains unseen in the God of the Mountains. In 1925, Collie Norman was the first recorded witness of the creature, as he recalls a terrifying experience in the face of Big Grey Man. Collie was a hiking enthusiast, professor, and member of the Royal Geographical Society. He reported that as he was returning to the summit, he was surrounded by mist and began to hear noises of footsteps that were not his. The footsteps sounded as if someone was chasing him, with steps 3 or 4 times the length of his own. Collie became extremely frightened and rushed down the hike to get away from the creature that was supposedly following him. After Collie came out with this story, many other hikers shared similar stories of their own encounters with the Big Grey Man, reporting that they as well heard footsteps following them and felt uneasy and a negative energy in the area. While in 1945, a worker, Peter Densham, reported that he heard strange noises, while the mist began closing in on his location, and with the added feeling of pressure around his neck. The worker fled the scene before anything else could escalate. Even though there have been only a few eyewitnesses, it's safe to say that wherever the Grey Man ventures, he is accompanied by a sense of irrational panic and dread. In at number 4, we have the Black Shuck. Considered the most common urban legend in Britain, we have Black Shuck. You can find the Black Shuck in the counties of East Anglia, lurking in the graveyards, crossroads, or forests. The Black Shuck is described as a large black dog with flaming red eyes. On some accounts, the Black Shuck appears to have one eye in the middle of its forehead. The dog varies in size, though has been compared to a large dog to the size of a horse. However, it is generally described as about the size of a mastiff, with shaggy black fur and glowing red eyes. These beasts were known to suddenly appear without warning, then disappear as quickly as they arrived. One of the most notable reports of Black Shuck is his appearance at the churches of Bungay and Blythburgh in Suffolk. On August 4th, 1577 at Blythburgh, Black Shuck is said to have burst in through the church doors. He ran up the aisle past a large congregation, attacking a man and a boy and causing the church steeple to collapse through the roof. As the dog left, the beast left scorch marks on the north door, which can be seen at the church to this day. The Black Shuck has a mixed reputation. In the earlier days of the legend, the Shuck was known as a negative omen. In its first encounters, it was even said to have eliminated people directly. Today, the Shuck's reputation has received an unlikely makeover. Some modern witnesses, mostly women, have reported that the Shuck acted as a protector and guided them home when they were lost at night. Sometimes referred to as an omen of death, sometimes a more companionable animal, but you might not want to take those chances if you are faced in front of the terrifying beast. In at number 3, we have Beast of Bodmin Moor. The Beast of Bodmin Moor is another old urban legend from Britain. It's known that for 3 decades since 1978, a phantom black cat the size of a puma is seen stalking the moors of Cornwall. The Beast of Bodmin Bodmin Moor has over 60 sightings of eyewitnesses reporting a Black Panther-like cat, being 3 to 5 feet long and featuring white eyes. Where there are reports of the beast, there was also a trail of mutilated livestock. The evidence was concrete enough that in 1995 the government ordered an official investigation into the existence of such a beast. The report finally concluded that there was no verifiable evidence of a big cat on Bodmin Moor, although it was careful to state that there was no evidence against it either. Shortly after, the report didn't lead anywhere. A small boy found a leopard skull lying on the banks of the River Fowey, thus creating bigger speculation about the beast being real. Sightings continued, and in 1998 there was a video footage released that clearly shows a black cat looking animal that fits the description of the beast of Bodmin Moor. More recently, in October 2016 near St Austell, there was reported a giant set of paw prints. Some people have reported being chased by the powerful and scary cat-like creature. Others have spotted it in the distance, not quite believing their eyes. Some believe that the animal is a species of wild cat, though extinct in Britain many years ago, still surviving on the moors of Cornwall. Others blame the paranormal, believing the beast to be a mythical spirit of a creature that roamed Cornwall in the past. In at number 2 we have Owlman of Mawnan. A remote church in Cornwall is known to be the home of a half-man, half-owl creature that has been terrifying the locals and tourists since the 1920s. Known as the Owlman of Mawnan Smith, the creature is a human-sized owl with large wings, long claws and glowing eyes. The first sighting of the Owlman was reported in April 1976, where 2 girls on vacation with their family walked down to the old church. When approaching the remote church, they saw what they described as a terrifying birdman with wings and feathers. The girls were so scared by their encounter with the Owlman that their parents decided to end their vacation early and leave Cornwall immediately. There was another sighting 2 years later. At first, the witnesses thought that someone was playing a trick on them, that it was a person dressed up in a costume. Like other reports, they described an abnormally large birdman, silver grey in colour with feathers. They only realised that it wasn't a trick when they saw the creature fly up into the air and disappear. After it flew away, they said that there was a strange static noise coming from the trees for some time afterwards. There was a further sighting in 1989 and then again 6 years later. The witness this time was an American tourist, and she described the Owlman as being around 5 foot tall with huge claws protruding from its vast wings. The most recent sighting was in September of 2009. It was reported that a young girl named Jessica Wilkins saw the Owlman of Mawnan for the first time this century. Though with all these sightings near the Mawnan church, the Owlman is still a mystery. Some theorize that the church is standing in the center of an ancient earthworks and has an earth energy line passing through the site. The theory suggests natural earth energy could be connected to the reports of the Owlman, but in any case the unsolved case of the Owlman is still a mystery. And finally, in at number 1 we have the Loch Ness Monster. Taking home in Scotland at Loch Ness River, this might be the most well-known urban legend in Britain. The famous legend of the Loch Ness Monster began to gain attraction in 1933. At the time, a road across the Loch Ness was finished, offering an unobstructed view of the lake. The first recorded sighting was in April of the same year, where a couple recalled seeing an enormous animal. They compared the creature that they witnessed to a dragon or prehistoric creature. After it crossed their car's path, it disappeared into the water. In December 1933, the Daily Mail commissioned Marmaduke Wetherall, a hunter, to locate the sea creature. Along the lake shores, he found large footprints that he believed belonged to a very powerful soft-footed animal about 20 feet long. In all reports, the appearance is generally noticed as the same. Common themes attributed to the monster include a large body with at least one hump, a long arched neck, a small head, and being grey or dark brown colour. The Loch Ness area attracted numerous monster hunters. Over the years, several sonar explorations were undertaken to locate the creature, but none were successful. In addition, numerous photographs allegedly showed the beast, but most were discredited as fake or as depicting other animals or objects. That being said, a satellite image on Apple Maps revealed what appeared to be a large creature around 30 meters long just below the surface of Loch Ness on April 19, 2014. This not only generated the usual hype of claims that it was the Loch Ness Monster, but also served to comfort those who were upset over the earlier speculation that Nessie had disappeared. And to this day, the creature photographed in this image is unidentified. Even though it's not confirmed, with all the reports and witnesses and the fact that most of the Loch Ness River is still unexplored, it's hard not to believe in the legend of Loch Ness Monster. The Spriggan is an urban legend known from Cornish fairy lore, where they are mostly located in West Penwith, Cornwall. They are closely related to pixies, but known to be dangerous and mischievous, whereas pixies are more cheerful and fun-loving, while Spriggans are more spine spiteful, especially directed at humans in the form of evil tricks. Spriggans are said to be the security force behind the fairy world. Unlike some fairies which serve to treat or trick humans, the Spriggans are said to measure out justice to humans who have unduly crossed fairies. They would dole out punishments, both big and small, to anyone who dared mess too much with the other world. Spriggans were depicted as grotesquely ugly and generally acting as fairy bodyguards. Though usually small, they have the ability to grow to enormous size as a defensive ability. Their strange and creepy appearance also aided the Spriggans in their aim to be feared by those who saw them. It was believed that the Spriggans haunt lonely places such as castle ruins, burrows, certain standing stones, and windswept crags. Spriggans were thought to be the source of such misfortunes as unhealthy crops, bad weather, and illness, especially in a time when the mechanics of such things were not fully understood. They were also said to be busy thieves, targeting those who offended them. They are known to steal small children and replace them with their own kind, leaving behind one of their own ugly large-headed children. Quote, one of their common traits was to lead lonely travellers into swamps or near dangerous and crumbling cliffs, a factor they share in common with the will-o'-the-wisp and the pixies, although the pixies would not lead people to dangerous places. If you want to avoid being punished by the Spriggans, the easiest thing you can do is make sure not to offend any type of fairy folk in any way. The second thing you can do, avoid tempting them. Even if you haven't initially done something to offend their fairy folk, the Spriggans may still be tempted to enact a little pre-revenge, just in case you were to wrong the fairy folk. In at number 4 we have the Pendle Witches. Pendle Hill was once the home of wolves and wild boar. It is also the location of Britain's biggest witchcraft trial that took place over 400 years ago. The Pendle Witches lived in the early 1600s at a time of religion and superstition. Catholics and those suspected of witchcraft came under more scrutiny than ever during this time, and the king brought in the fatal penalty for those found guilty of witchcraft. The 12 Pendle Witches, all local women, while 6 of the Pendle Witches came from one of 2 families, were charged with the murders of 10 people by the use of witchcraft. Perhaps the most notorious witch trial of the 17th century, the legend of the Pendle Witches is one of the many dark tales of imprisonment and execution at Lancaster Castle. 1 woman died while held in custody, 11 went to trial, 1 was tried and found guilty at York, and the other 10 were tried at Lancaster. Only 1 was found not guilty. The story began with an altercation between one of the accused, Alison Device, and a peddler John Law. Alison, either travelling or begging on the road to Cawdor Forest, passed John Law and asked him for some pins. He refused and Alison cursed him. It was a short while after this that John Law suffered a stroke, for which he blamed Alison and her powers. The deaths of the 4 other villagers that had occurred years before the trial were raised and the blame laid on the witchcraft performed by another suspected witch in the area. Coming in at number 3 we have Catchy. The Catchy is known to be a ghost-like cat covered in all black fur, besides a small white spot on its chest. This creature haunts the Scottish Highlands. The size of the Catchy is said to be close to the size of a large dog. One of the theories about the Catchy suggests that they aren't fairies but are actually witches that have the ability to transform back and forth between human forms and cat form. This, however, could only be done 9 times, with the final transformation into the cat being permanent. This is often referenced as the origin for the concept of cats having 9 lives. Those in the Highlands did not trust the Catchy because they believed that these creatures are soul thieves. The common belief was that the Catchy could pass over the corpse of the dead prior to burial and steal the soul from someone before the gods had claimed it. Special watches were set up to guard the dead, known as Fail Vadalak, which means a late wake. Those on this watch would attempt to keep the Catchy away from the room containing the corpse by distracting it in a variety of methods, such as using catnip, riddles, games, and music. The Catchy was believed to be fond of warmth, and therefore fires were never lit near the body so that they were not attracted to the area. The Catchy was feared due to the belief that it was a harbinger of death, much like the Grim Reaper. Although mostly a silent hunter, the Catchy would sometimes let out 3 blood-curdling howls that could be heard from miles around. Those that heard the howls would need to reach a place of safety before the 3rd howl, or they would be overcome with fear and would die from sheer terror. Coming in at number 2 we have Black Dog of Bunting Nook. Don't be fooled, this isn't just an ordinary suburban dog. The Black Dog of Burning Nook has been described to have dark black fur, snarling fangs, black eyes, and great in size. Spotted by numerous residents and several police officers over the years, the creature has also been reported as extremely large, with huge devilish saucer-like eyes. The creature haunts once the road in Bunting Nook, Naunton, according to local legend, as the huge black dog is known to appear in an instant in front of people's cars. From there it targets men, as the dog makes the car stall before preying on the passenger. The black dog legends are often seen as an omen, warning of the imminent death of the person who sees it, or of a close family member, and certain folklorists hold that the creatures patrol ley lines, sources of mysterious energy that threads around the world. But Sheffield is not the only part of Yorkshire to have had sightings of the mysterious creature, but true or fake, the demon dog is one of Sheffield's scariest apparitions. According to reports though, it hasn't been seen since 2007, so you might be safe from this one. Or not, or you could die tomorrow. We could all die tomorrow. And finally, in at number 1, we have Hairy Hands of Dartmoor. The Hairy Hands of Dartmoor is a ghost story that focuses on a stretch of road which supposedly had a high number of accidents during the early 20th century. The suggested cause for the loss of control of these vehicles was given to be supernatural activity interfering with the vehicles. According to the stories, the hands appear suddenly, seize the steering wheel of a car or the handlebars of a motorcycle, and then force the victim off the road. In these early cases, the hands are described as being invisible. To further back up this claim, since around 1910, drivers and cyclists had allegedly been reporting unusual accidents, the victims reporting that their vehicle had swerved violently and steered off the side of the road. Some described that it was as if something had wrenched the vehicle out of their control. This could happen to cars, motor coaches, cyclists, and even pony and traps. In June of 1921, Dr. E.H. Helby, who was at the time serving as the medical officer nearby, lost control of his motorcycle and sidecar. In the sidecar was seated his 2 children, who survived. He had just about enough time to warn the children to jump before he was thrown from his bike and met his final fate. His children related that as he shouted at them to get to safety, he was fighting against an invisible force in his efforts to control the bike. On August 26th of the same year, a British Army captain lost control of his motorcycle and was thrown off as well. He was known to be a very experienced rider. In response to questioning him, the captain stated that it was not his fault, and believe it or not, something drove him off the road. A pair of hairy hands closed over his. He apparently felt them as plainly as ever. He fought them for all he was worth, but they were too strong for him. They forced the machine into the turf at the edge of the road. Further proof of the hands can be found in Michael Williams' 2003 book Supernatural Dartmoor, where the author was told by journalist Rufus Endell that he was driving near Post Bridge when a pair of hands gripped the driving wheel and he had to fight for control. When he successfully avoided crashing his car, the hands disappeared. Rufus asked that the story not be published until after his death, so we don't have the opportunity to further check out the report. Castle Stuart. Magnificently situated on the Moray Firth near Inverness, the 5-star Castle Stuart is a sight to behold. A mere 7 miles from the heart of Inverness, Castle Stuart is an ideally located base from which to explore the scenic and historic Highlands of Scotland. Walk the battlements with the ghost of Charles I before he lost his kingdom and his head, or with bonny Prince Charlie the night before his tragic defeat at nearby Culloden Moor. The property was held by the Macintoshes, but was given by Mary, Queen of Scots, to James Stuart, Earl of Moray. Moray was made regent for James VI, but was later assassinated. During the time that Stuart lived in the castle for an unknown reason, local residents began to spread the rumour that the castle was haunted. To disprove the theory, James Stuart offered a reward to anyone willing to spend a night in the castle. A local minister accepted the challenge and stayed in a room at the top of the East Tower. Stuart was hopeful that once the minister told the people that the tower was not haunted, the word of the castle being haunted would not spread. The next morning, however, he was found dead in the courtyard with a look of terror on his face. It was never explained what had happened to him, and no killer was ever found. At some point in the night, he had either jumped from the window of the tower or he had been pushed. This only cemented the fear that the castle was in fact cursed. From that day, the locals refused to enter the castle grounds. It lay dormant for around 300 years until it was refurbished and turned into the hotel that we know today. Guests who have stayed there since it reopened have experienced a number of hauntings. Staff have heard disembodied footsteps on the stairs at midnight, horrible screams, and the ghost of a headless man was seen prowling the corridors. Some people have seen a figure pass their window too fast for them to make sense of it, but caught a glimpse in their eye as if someone had fallen from the tower above. The reviews of the hotel prove that guests are convinced the hauntings are real, but they also claim to have enjoyed the stay. If you like being terrified by ancient spirits or tormented by lost souls, this might be the place for you. In at number 4 we have Chillingham Castle in Chillingham. Chillingham Castle is a 13th century stronghold famed for action and battles. With its fine rooms, gardens, lakes, fountains and tea rooms, the castle has an extraordinary ownership bloodline which runs back to the 1200s. Chillingham occupied a strategic position during Northumberland's bloody border feuds. Chillingham Castle was often under attack and often basked in the patronage of royal visitors, a tradition that remains to this day. Edward VIII came to hunt there, and members of today's royal family continue the tradition with private visits to the castle this century. The medieval castle remains as it was, just with galleries that you can see today added in Tudor days. For the visit of King James VI of Scotland, the castle is a dark past at the hands of the once owner John Sage. Once injured, he could no longer fight for the king. He begged to be kept on in some capacity. He was given the job of torturer and stepped into his new role with relish. It was said that he had a deep hatred for the Scots and little mercy, with over 7,500 men, women and children suffering an agonizing end at his hands. Often legs and arms were broken before they were thrown 20 feet down into the oubliette. With no way to escape, they were to eventually starve and pass away in pain and in fear. It was also said that John Sage met with an equally gruesome death after he accidentally killed a tribesman's daughter that he had been in love with. The father exacted his revenge and John was executed at Chillingham, with parts of his body being taken as souvenirs, a fitting end to a life dedicated to such cruelty. One of the most famous ghosts is the ghost of the Blue Boy, often witnessed by flashes of blue light or halo. These sightings settled down when two skeletons, one of a man and the other a young boy, were uncovered during renovation work. They even found documents with the remains dating back to the Armada. Who they were and why they were hidden remains a mystery. Some of the smaller hauntings guests reported including footsteps being heard walking around the rooms and the taps turning on by themselves. Another common sighting includes those of the Lady in White, who, after suffering from being poisoned, begged guests for water in the pantry. These are just a couple of the ghosts and hauntings around the castle. If you're brave enough to investigate, you might find a few more. In at number 3, the Swan Hotel in Suffolk. This luxury 4-star hotel is set in the middle of the historic Tudor town of Lavenham. In the heart of Suffolk, its oak-beamed interior makes for a cozy feel, giving guests a sense of stepping back in time. It's said that a housekeeper who once lived there back when the hotel was a thriving coaching inn back in the 19th century fell pregnant out of wedlock. The baby's father was happy to marry the lady under the circumstances and promised to look after them both. However, on the wedding day the gentleman had second thoughts and left the pregnant lady standing at the altar. Savage. It is said that after that she became inconsolable and very depressed. What is now room 15 in the Swan Hotel was once the housekeeping quarters, and it is said that the poor woman was found hanging in this room by one of the inn's workers. Her ghost remains behind to chill the spines of those that dared to cross her path. A security guard was working alone late one night at the Swan Hotel, and as he was doing his final checks around the hotel, he came into contact with her, which scared him out of his wits and sent him running in the other direction. Several guests have reported having seen her standing in room 15 in the middle of the night. Once a nun was staying in that very room when she awoke, startled to feel the ghost tickling her feet. I guess you either get lucky and she likes you, or she chooses to scare you half to death. In at number 2 we have the Langham in London. One of the more upmarket entries on this list is the Langham in London. I know it's upmarket because Cher stayed there. How do I know? Because I stalk her live. Since opening in 1865, this 5-star hotel has played host to a number of infamous historical figures, both living and dead. With nearly 500 rooms and suites, it's really not surprising that a number of ghosts have been seen regularly at the hotel. The paranormal activity at the hotel became apparent when it was owned by the BBC, when it was discovered that there were at least 5 ghosts that make regular appearances at the hotel. The most active of the ghosts at the hotel is said to be that of a German prince or nobleman who was thought to have met his death when he threw himself out of the window of an upper story room. Ghosts have seen his ghostly form moving through walls and closed doors, and he is often accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature. Room 333 is supposed to be the most haunted. In this room, a BBC newscaster woke up to see a fluorescent ball of light which slowly took a human shape. The apparition hovered 2 feet above the floor, the lower portion of its legs missing. It was dressed in an extravagant Victorian evening wear. The announcer tried to communicate with the ghost, asking what it wanted. The spirit slowly started to move towards the newscaster, arms outstretched, eyes empty. The announcer fled in distress to the safety of his co-workers and told them of this encounter. A colleague accompanied him back to his room. The ghost was still there when they entered, but appeared less visible and less threatening before slowly fading away. Bay. Other BBC staff reported seeing the apparition in the same room, though only in October. There have been reports from other famous guests that taps will turn on in the night and turn off when investigated. Many people often struggle to sleep here and have to move rooms or even hotels. And finally, in at number 1 we have Malmaison in Oxford. This hotel is the most unique on this list. It was once a large prison located in Oxford. They have converted each cell into a hotel room. They have 95 rooms from you to choose from, starting with standard double house of correction to signature suite that is a 2-story of cells converted to a loft-style room. Oxford Castle functioned as Her Majesty's Prison Oxford from 1888 to 1996. One of the more notable prisoners to be held in Oxford Castle was Mary Blandy, an 18th century murderer who poisoned her father with arsenic. She believed the arsenic was a love potion that would force him to approve of her fiancé, a Scottish nobleman who was already married. She was hanged on April 6, 1752. It's said that her spirit still roams the castle to this day. During the Victorian era, it wasn't uncommon for children to be imprisoned inside. The youngest inmate to be held inside Oxford Prison was Julie Ann Crumpling. She was just 7 years old when she was sentenced to 7 days of hard labour for allegedly stealing a pram. Perhaps the most terrifying report comes from one of the security guards who was on his nightly patrol. The security has long been very wary of the location and had experienced several things before such an unexplained sounds, bangs, and the usual phenomena. However, on one dark night when the guards was coming to an end of his patrol, when his dog stopped and shuffled quickly backwards, growling at something in front of him. It was then 2 large shadow figures appeared before him. As anyone would do, he ran as fast as he could. A few days later, his dog died suddenly. He believed he had been frightened to death. You can stay in rooms when prisoners were once tortured and even killed. Although the hotel has been fitted to be a rather comfortable boutique hotel, it does not erase the horrors that have occurred. Sometime in the 1970s, a group were carrying out a sentence in one of the cells when poltergeist activity suddenly erupted. Things got so bad that a priest had to be called to exorcise whatever they had awoken. Would you dare stay here? I wouldn't, although maybe.
Cantor Gwaelod. I swear I do look up pronunciations for words, I really do. Anywho, welcome to a place that has a lot of things in common with the legendary Atlantis. Cardigan Bay is home to some outstanding coastal trails overlooking the bay, with many people saying that they can see glimmers of buildings underneath the water. And that has led to the story of the Sunken Kingdom, a city that was once thriving that had been lost to the waves due to the carelessness of a lockkeeper called Sìth. People still claim that you can see the buildings and hear the bells ringing out to this day. So it was originally a fertile and prosperous kingdom, with no fewer than 16 heavily populated cities, and was said to occupy a lush, fertile area that laid on a stretch of land running between Ramsay Island and Bardsey Island, which is now Cardigan Bay, West Wales. But it was like low-lying. A number of steep embankments and gates have been built to protect the land from flooding. There was a system of gates to allow water to enter the kingdom in order to irrigate the agricultural pastures. The kingdom was ruled by Gwydno Garahir, and he had made his friend Sìth guardian of the sea defenses, a role that included making sure the gates were shut every night. However, after a night of revelry at the king's palace, Sìth stumbled drunkenly into bed without checking that the gates were closed, and unfortunately, it happened to be a stormy night that night, and the high spring tides broke through the defenses, quickly flooding the entire area and forcing its people to escape to the hills. So, there is physical evidence that inhabited land did disappear under the waves during the period that the tale is set, as well as the stumps of an ancient sunken forest that can be seen at very low tide at Yenislas. Archaeologists have also found a timber walkway dated between 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, which was probably built so locals could continue to live in an increasingly waterlogged environment. In 1770, a Welsh scholar by the name of William Owen Pugh reported seeing sunken human habitations about 4 miles off the Ceredigion coast, between the rivers Ystwyth and Teifi. Human and animal footprints have also been found preserved in the hardened top layer of peat, along with burnt stones that came from ancient hearths. In fourth place, we have the Berwin Mountains UFO, known as the Roswell event, after similarities with the infamous Roswell extraterrestrial event in the US. The cause of this 1974 phenomenon is still very much up for debate, something I like to hear. So on the evening of the 23rd of January in 1974, residents of the Berwin Mountains area in northern Wales reported a loud noise and a bright light in the sky. A Ministry of Defense investigation found that there were about 5 other reports of UFOs seen over the UK at 10 p.m. that same night, which is when this incident happened. 3 sightings were in the home counties, 1 in Lincolnshire and another in Sussex. Witnesses reported seeing a bright light in the northwest which seemed to fall towards the horizon. An expert who undertook independent research into the Berwin Mountains incident for the British Astronomical Society reported that a fireball was visible over most of the UK that night. Now, sightings were received from Somerset, Norfolk, Manchester, Woodchester and Edinburgh, which is noted. The fireball descended from about 120 kilometers in the sky to about 35 kilometers before disintegrating over Manchester. UFO experts claimed that a UFO crashed and the British government covered up the military's recovery of a crashed spaceship. Witnesses claimed to see a bright ball of yellow over top before feeling a huge tremor underfoot. Now, many have tried to make sense of it all, and the list of theories is as long as my arm. And still, no one really knows what happened, not even those who live in the Berwin Mountains. In third place, we have the death of Hugh Watson. Alrighty. Time for a bunch of wild facts. So when a barn in Landsworst burned to a crisp in December of 1976, firefighters found the body of a 77-year-old man who lived alone, had no relatives, and was last seen drinking at the local Penwith Hotel in Landsworst, which was a location he was known to frequent often. Pardon me, I totally forgot the part where he had been stabbed 22 times with either a pitchfork or a screwdriver, because, that's totally normal and not overkill at all. So most theories actually lean more towards the pitchfork theory, and while I get he was found in a barn, that completely boggles my mind. I guess it was a weapon of convenience, but cripes. Detectives have managed to learn that the old man had mobility difficulties and walked with the aid of 2 sticks, so they believed he must have been carried into the hayloft where he later died, since he never really could have climbed up there by himself. A post-mortem investigation revealed that some of his wounds were serious, but others were superficial, suggesting that whoever committed the crime spent some time in the barn with them. That same investigation found he died from asphyxia, and over 6,000 people were interviewed in hopes of some kind of information coming to light. Detectives were drafted in from across the region to trace anyone who saw him that night, but so far, we got nothing. Who knows? In second place, we have Teggy. I swear, people need to get a lot more creative with naming their river monsters. So many monikers are just poor knockoffs of Nessie, and unknown creatures deserve better than being the equivalent of a dollar store knockoff toy. Just saying. Located in Lintigid, or Bala Lake in English, lies the legend of Teggy. Look, I'm gonna go for the English versions, folks. You've heard me butcher enough. First spotted in 1975, Teggy is thought to be an amphibian around 12 feet in length, described as a grayish brown or black in color, and typically between 8 to 12 feet long. This mysterious animal is believed to have 1 or 2 humps, a long neck, and a roundish football-sized head with a crocodilian snout. So there have been sightings throughout the years, but kind of like Nessie, nothing super substantial. A witness in 1975 claims that out of nowhere she saw a grayish object moving in the water, and whatever it was at least 8 feet long and had a small hump in the middle and was moving towards the eastern shore. So when she jumped into her car and drove to the point where she thought the object would come ashore, no sign of her. And when people pressed this witness afterwards for a description, she told them it looked like closest to a crocodile. She returned to Bala Lake the following day and found a very large dead pike on the shore with massive bite marks on it that are believed to have been left by Teggy. So another witness, going by B. Vickers, reported spotting the monster at close range in the summer of 1992. She said it was twilight when she was on the shingle beach of the lake in front of the Catamaran Club, looking for flat stones to skim over the lake's calm surface, when she suddenly turned a full 80 degrees and looked straight at the monster, who was looking right back at her. So at 20 meters away, with its black head and neck clear above the surface of the water. Ooh, fun fact time! One expert has a theory that Teggy can move overland when necessary to feed or breed in other bodies of water or use rivers, which connect to other lakes and the sea to find fresh feeding grounds or, a mate. It's also believed that she could be nocturnal. It's also believed that she could be, like a nocturnal hunter, protected by the darkness and minimal nighttime lighting that is common in rural areas of the UK. Perfect conditions for a shy and elusive creature. Hey look, this all matches up with what I've been saying about introverted sea creatures. Let them have their privacy. In first place, we have the disappearance of Trevelyan Evans. So normally when a shopkeeper puts up a sign saying they'll be back in 2 minutes, they'll be back within the hour. Right? Well, this shop owner and antique dealer, Trevelyan Evans, put up this sign in 1990 and, she hasn't come back. Longest lunch break ever, honestly. So she had been away during the week of her disappearance with her husband Richard, who was renovating the couple's holiday bungalow, and returned to Llangollen on Wednesday, the 13th of June. Fast forward to Saturday, the 16th, she opened her shop, Attic Antiques on Church Street, at the usual time of 9:30 a.m. and had parked her dark blue Ford Escort Estate 200 yards away. And for people like me who are completely vehicle clueless, notice how I stumbled over that because vehicles, it's just a 90s long blue car. Laugh all you want, but I constantly vex my dad with how little I can verify any type of vehicle, even though I've been surrounded with car knowledge since birth. It's not in the brain. So during the morning, approximately 25 friends and customers had called in, and according to the friends who visited, she appeared, relaxed, happy, and heck, she even made plans to go out that night. And the weather that day was sunny, according to the police, and the town center was described as, busy. At about 12:40 p.m., she left a note on the front door of her shop saying, back in 2 minutes. A well-dressed man was reportedly seen talking to her in the shop shortly before she left the note, but his identity was never confirmed. It is known that she bought an apple and a banana and was seen crossing the nearby Castle Street. Apparently, a banana skin was found in a dustbin in the shop after this time, so it's thought she must have returned there, but it was never confirmed. Her handbag, car keys, and jacket, along with fruit and flowers that she intended to take home, were left behind in her shop, and the car stayed parked where it was. There were 2 more suspected sightings, but both were unconfirmed. So let's dive into this. At 2:35 p.m., a woman matching her description was seen walking out of town along the A5 towards Corwin, beside the Riverside Park. At 3:45 p.m., there was another sighting, this time of a woman walking into Park Avenue from the direction of the River Dee. More than 1,500 names were investigated, and about 700 cars were eliminated from the inquiry. Searches of the river, the canal, mine shafts, and caves in the area were carried out, but nothing. In January of 2001, the case was reopened by police in the hope, new forensic techniques would suggest fresh evidence, but only led to a series of false arrests, including her husband. The case was re-examined in 2010 on the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, but we got nothing. No money was ever taken from her bank account, indicating to the police that she might have been abducted and killed. But the curious thing, she left so much behind, so she clearly thought she wasn't going to be long. And once again, the car was parked less than 100 feet away and stayed there. To this day, the case remains open, with calls for information still being asked for over 30 years later. Hey look, stranger things have happened. I remember back in 2009 hearing about a missing youngling case from the 70s that was finally solved thanks to a deathbed confession. That's the thing. Someone obviously saw something or was involved. We just gotta wait for that person to come forward.